What happens to the human mind when tomorrow stops existing? When every morning becomes identical to the last, and the calendar no longer moves toward anything except the end of biological function? When the question, "What am I living for?" has no answer that involves freedom, second chances, or the world beyond concrete and steel. Most people followed the Kouri Richins case through headlines about Moscow mules and fentanyl, through courtroom sketches and witness testimonies, through guilty verdicts and sentencing hearings. But virtually, no one has examined what happens in the space after the news cameras leave. The years that stretch ahead when public attention fades, but the prison cell remains exactly the same size it was on day one. The decades where nothing changes except the face in the mirror growing older behind bars. This is the part of the story that exists in shadows, the chapter that unfolds in silence, the reality that transforms a criminal case into a human experience of permanent consequence. And you're about to hear it told in a way no other channel has presented it. If this is your first time here, you've just found True Crime Vic, where we don't stop at the verdict. We go into the aftermath, into the years most people never think about, into the psychological and institutional reality of what a life sentence actually means in practice. Take a second right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to hear goes far beyond the crime itself. Kouri Richins grew up building the kind of life that photographs well. Licensed as a real estate agent in Utah, she worked in one of the most competitive and affluent markets in the American West. Summit County sits adjacent to Park City, a destination known internationally for world-class ski resorts, film festivals, and the kind of wealth that transforms mountain towns into playgrounds for the privileged. Property values in this region rank among the highest in Utah. The homes are expansive, the views are breathtaking, and the lifestyle reflects financial success in visible, tangible ways. Kouri and her husband Eric lived in Camas, a small community tucked into this exclusive landscape. They had 3 young sons. The house was large enough to host family gatherings that most people only see in magazines. From the outside looking in, everything appeared to function smoothly. Careers were progressing. Children were growing. Real estate ventures were moving forward. Eric Richins was 39 years old. He worked as a real estate developer, someone who understood property, investment, and long-term financial planning. People who knew him used words like devoted and committed when describing his relationship with his children. He was present in their lives, involved in their routines, building something stable for their future. By all visible measures, Eric was a man living a successful life with no indication that danger existed inside his own home. He trusted the person he shared a bed with. He had no reason to believe that trust was misplaced, and that trust would cost him his life. March 4th, 2022, started as an ordinary evening. Eric and Kouri had a drink together around 9 in the evening. They were celebrating something related to work, a moment that seemed positive and worth acknowledging. The details were unremarkable enough that no one would have thought twice about the scene. A couple sharing a drink in their own home after a long week. Eric went to bed that night, expecting to wake up the next morning. He never did. When he was found unresponsive the following day, the initial assumption might have been medical emergency, sudden cardiac event, something tragic but explainable through natural causes. Then, the toxicology results came back. The level of fentanyl in Eric Richins' system was approximately 5 times the recognized lethal dose. To understand what that number means, you have to strip away any ambiguity about intent. A lethal dose is the amount that kills. 5 times that amount is not accidental exposure. It is not recreational use gone wrong. It is not a miscalculation or a mistake. 5 times the lethal dose is a quantity that communicates deliberate action. It tells investigators exactly what they need to know about whether this death was intentional. And the answer, written in toxicology reports and medical examiner findings, was unambiguous. But the story didn't start on March 4th. As investigators dug deeper into Eric's medical history and the timeline leading up to his death, another piece of the puzzle emerged. Eric had reportedly become severely ill on a prior occasion, sick enough that people around him noticed, sick enough that it caused alarm. But he recovered. At the time, no one treated the episode as poisoning. It was filed away as a bad reaction, food poisoning, a stomach bug, something explainable and temporary. Looking back through the lens of what investigators later uncovered, that prior illness took on entirely different significance. It wasn't a random sickness. It was an attempt that failed. She had tried once. Eric survived, and then she tried again with a dose large enough to guarantee the outcome. Prosecutors began building the case around motive. And what they found was a marriage in financial crisis beneath its polished exterior. Evidence emerged of significant fraud, including allegations that Kouri had forged documents and manipulated real estate transactions in ways that benefited her financially at Eric's expense. Eric had reportedly begun discovering discrepancies. He had started asking questions. He had taken steps to protect his assets, actions that suggested he was beginning to understand something was very wrong. There was a life insurance policy worth $1.9 million. The financial picture that emerged during the investigation was one of a woman who saw her husband not as a partner, but as an obstacle, and she had decided the solution was permanent. Then came the detail that stopped observers across the country in their tracks. In May of 2023, while Kouri Richins was under active investigation for the murder of her husband, she published a children's book. The title was Are You With Me? And it was marketed as a grief resource for children coping with the loss of a parent. The book was dedicated to Eric. Kouri gave interviews about it. She appeared in public presenting herself as a bereaved mother trying to help her 3 young sons navigate the trauma of losing their father. She spoke about grief, about healing, about the importance of supporting children through unimaginable loss. She did all of this while law enforcement was building a murder case against her. She wrote a book about helping children process the death of a parent, while investigators were gathering evidence that she had caused that death. The level of calculation required to maintain that public persona, while knowing what she knew, is difficult to comprehend. Kouri Richins was arrested on May 8, 2023. The charges were aggravated murder and 5 counts of distribution of a controlled substance. She was held without bail. The case drew national and international media attention, not just because of the crime itself, but because of the sheer audacity of the children's book. The trial proceeded, evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and the jury reached a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The sentence she received translates in practical terms to a minimum of 50 years before any possibility of parole. For a woman who was in her mid-30s at the time of sentencing, 50 years extends well past any reasonable life expectancy. This is, in every functional sense, a life sentence. There is no exit strategy. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. There is only the tunnel, extending forward into decades that will be spent inside the same institution, following the same routines, waking up to the same reality day after day after day. Kouri Richins was transferred to the Utah State Correctional Facility. This is a modern complex located in Salt Lake County, replacing the aging Draper prison that Utah operated for decades. The facility officially opened in July of 2022, just months after Eric's death. It cost $1.3 billion to construct and covers approximately 200 acres. The entire complex spans 1.3 million square feet. It was designed according to current correctional standards, incorporating programming spaces, educational areas, mental health services, recreation facilities, and work assignment zones. The language surrounding the facility emphasizes rehabilitation alongside security, but no amount of modern design changes what a prison fundamentally is. Steel doors still control movement. Schedules still dictate every hour of every day. Freedom is measured in minutes and granted or revoked based on behavior and classification. The women's section of this facility houses hundreds of female inmates at any given time, and Kouri Richins is now one of them. This facility is not a temporary stop. It is the destination. It is where she will spend the next several decades and almost certainly where she will die. When any new inmate arrives at a facility like Utah State Correctional, the intake process begins immediately. Medical staff conduct a comprehensive physical examination. Blood work is drawn. Infectious disease screening is completed. A mental health professional conducts a psychological assessment, asking direct questions about history of self-harm, prior mental health treatment, and current emotional state. These evaluations are not optional. They are not casual conversations. The information gathered during these assessments determines the level of monitoring the inmate will receive in the days and weeks ahead. It determines housing placement, access to programming, and the degree of supervision applied to daily activities. A classification officer then reviews the complete file. For Kouri Richins, that file carried specific weight. The crime was deliberate and planned. It involved a prior attempt, demonstrating persistence and escalation. It showed a sustained capacity to deceive the people closest to her over an extended period, including her own children. At the same time, she had no prior criminal record, no history of institutional violence, no gang affiliations or connections to organized criminal networks. Classification is a balancing calculation that weighs risk factors against institutional behavior predictors. It determines nearly everything about a prisoner's daily existence: housing unit assignment, work placement, programming access, movement privileges within the facility. All of it flows from that initial classification decision. The intake period at most Utah correctional facilities lasts approximately 30 days. During this time, the new inmate is separated from general population. She is learning the institutional rules, observing how the system operates, understanding how meals work, how commissary functions, how phone calls are made, how visits are scheduled. Other inmates are watching. Staff members are watching. Assessments are being made from every direction. When intake ends, the inmate is moved to permanent housing. That transition is significant in ways that are difficult to explain to someone who has never experienced incarceration. The intake period, for all its difficulty, still carries the psychological quality of transition. It feels temporary, because it is temporary. Permanent housing is different. Permanent housing is where the reality of the sentence settles in completely and stops being abstract. It is where the numbers stop being numbers and become lived experience. The daily schedule inside Utah State Correctional Facility is structured to the minute, and it does not bend for personal preference, emotional state, or individual needs. 5 a.m, the facility wakes up. An alarm sounds across the housing units. Within minutes, inmates are expected to be awake, dressed, and prepared for the day. Missing that window means missing breakfast. The cell is small. Standard dimensions in most correctional facilities place a double occupancy cell at roughly the size of a parking space, a bunk bed, a small toilet, a small sink. If there is a cellmate, that person becomes a significant part of daily existence, whether the relationship is comfortable or not. Privacy is not a feature of incarceration. Solitude is not an option, unless it is imposed as punishment. Breakfast lasts approximately 10 minutes. The chow hall is loud, in the way that only large institutional spaces can be. Hundreds of voices, metal trays, the echo of a room designed for function rather than comfort. 10 minutes to eat, and then movement back to the housing unit. Between roughly 5:30 in the morning and 9, many facilities implement a lockdown period. Inmates are in their cells. There is no movement, no programming, no recreation. For several hours, the cell is the entire world. Fluorescent lighting, the ambient sounds of a facility housing hundreds of people. Some inmates read during this time. Some write letters. Some attempt to sleep. Some sit with the weight of whatever thoughts arrive uninvited. From approximately 9 until 11, there is time outside the cell. Recreation, programming, work assignments. Kitchen work at many facilities pays less than $1 per day. Work assignments in other areas carry different levels of status and social meaning within the prison community. Then another lockdown period from 11 until noon. Lunch at noon, again lasting roughly 10 minutes. Afternoon programming fills the hours from 12 to 2. Therapy sessions, educational classes, work assignments. Then the longest lockdown stretch of the day arrives. From 2 in the afternoon until 5. 3 hours in a cell with nothing changing. This is the period where time moves slowest, where the walls feel closest, where the reality of confinement becomes most acute. The final out-of-cell period runs from roughly 5 until 7 in the evening. Dinner, recreation, phone calls which are monitored and logged, letters which are screened before being delivered or sent. Then 7 in the evening arrives, and the facility moves toward lights out. The arithmetic is stark. Approximately 18 hours of every 24-hour period are spent locked in or immediately near a cell. Roughly 6 hours involve movement and interaction, and that calculation assumes nothing goes wrong. One incident, one rule violation, one conflict with another inmate or a staff member, and the equation changes immediately. Lockdown extensions, loss of privileges, days or weeks of reduced freedom inside a system that already defines freedom in very narrow terms. There is one dimension of Kouri Richins' situation that matters enormously when trying to understand what her daily life actually looks like. Because of the high-profile nature of her case and the widespread media coverage it received, correctional facilities often make housing decisions for inmates like her based on security concerns that have nothing to do with her own behavior inside the institution. Protective custody exists as a classification within prison systems for inmates who, for various reasons, face heightened risk of harm from other incarcerated individuals. It is not a punitive designation. It is a management decision. But the practical reality of protective custody is that it functions as a significant layer of additional isolation. Single-cell housing, reduced contact with general population, meals taken separately or with a very limited group of other protectively classified inmates, recreation time that is restricted in duration and often conducted away from the main population, programming that may be delivered individually or in small, isolated groups. The prison population around her would have known her case. High-profile cases generate discussion and recognition inside facilities in ways that are immediate and lasting. Some inmates might view her with hostility based on the nature of her crime. Others might seek association with her for their own reasons. Managing those dynamics is part of what drives protective custody placement decisions for inmates whose cases have drawn the level of attention Kouri Richins' case received. What that means in practice is that the isolation she would experience in the early years of her sentence could extend well beyond what most people imagine when they picture prison. Not the noise of a crowded facility, but the silence of a segregated unit. Not the complex social dynamics of general population, but the enforced solitude of confinement within confinement. Eventually, as time passes and her case moves further from headlines and public memory, that calculation may shift. A transition to general population at some future point would mark a significant change, but that transition carries its own complexity, its own challenges, its own set of adjustments that would need to be navigated carefully. There is a question that every person serving a long sentence inside a correctional facility wakes up with each morning. What am I working toward? For most inmates, that question has an answer. However distant, however difficult, there is something on the horizon, a parole hearing being prepared for, a classification review on the calendar, a program completed that moves them one step closer to a door that will eventually open. The answer to that question is what gives the structure of incarceration its psychological scaffolding. It is what makes the schedule bearable. It is what connects today's choices to a different tomorrow. It is what allows the human mind to survive years of confinement without completely fracturing. For Kouri Richins, that question has no answer. Every morning, inside the Utah State Correctional Facility, the silence that meets that question is the same silence it met the morning before. And it will be the same silence tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, extending forward for decades. That is not metaphor. That is not dramatic exaggeration. That is the documented reality of a life without parole sentence. The removal not just of physical freedom, but of the forward orientation that makes confinement psychologically survivable. Most people cannot truly comprehend what it means to live without the possibility of tomorrow being different. Human beings are wired for hope, for goals, for progress toward something. Take that away completely, and what remains is an existence that functions on purely mechanical terms. Wake up, follow the schedule, eat when told to eat, lock down when told to lock down. Repeat, forever. The contrast between the life Kouri Richins lived before March of 2022 and the life she lives now could not be more absolute. From a luxury home in Summit County, with mountain views and designer furnishings, to a cell the size of a parking space, with fluorescent lights and a steel toilet. From autonomy over her schedule, her wardrobe, her social interactions, to a life where every movement is controlled, every phone call is monitored, every letter is read by someone else before it reaches its destination. From planning real estate deals and hosting family gatherings, to wondering whether the longest lockdown of the day will feel longer today than it did yesterday. From a future that seemed open to possibilities to a future that is already written and involves nothing except aging inside the same building. The children she claimed to be helping with her grief book are growing up without her. They are processing the loss of their father and the imprisonment of their mother simultaneously. They are old enough to eventually understand what she did. They are young enough that the trauma will shape their entire psychological development. The book she wrote, the interviews she gave, the public persona she maintained, all of it will be accessible to them as they grow older. They will be able to read her words about grief and healing while knowing that she caused the grief she claimed to be addressing. The psychological complexity those children will navigate for the rest of their lives is staggering. And Kouri Richins will navigate her own complexity from inside a cell, watching years turn into decades, watching her sons grow up through brief monitored phone calls and supervised visits if they choose to maintain contact at all, watching the world outside continue without her while the world inside remains frozen in the same routine, the same alarm, the same lockdowns, the same 10-minute meals, the same silence, when she asks herself what she is working toward. This is where the story goes after the verdict. This is the reality that exists beyond the courtroom. This is what a life sentence actually means when you strip away the abstraction and look at the lived experience of confinement stretching forward with no endpoint except death. And this is only the beginning of understanding what Kouri Richins' prison reality looks like. If you want to see how this story continues, how the years ahead will unfold, and why this sentence might actually be more brutal than death row, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Vic. Hit that like button and stay tuned, because the next part goes even deeper into the psychological and institutional reality of living a life sentence in America. This is True Crime Vic, and we'll see you in the next one. The Utah State Correctional Facility was designed with something specific in mind that older prisons deliberately avoided: natural light. The housing sections include floor-to-ceiling windows, a deliberate architectural choice meant to represent a departure from the pure containment model that defined American corrections for most of the 20th century. The intention was to allow the people living inside to see daylight, to observe the passage of seasons, to maintain some visual connection to the world beyond the walls. and the windows deliver exactly what they were designed to deliver. From inside the Dell building, where the women's population is housed, the Wasatch mountain range is visible. The same peaks that Kouri Richins once drove past on her way to real estate showings, client meetings, school drop-offs, and all the daily movements that defined a life she no longer has access to. That landscape is still there, framed in glass every single day, but the windows do not open. The doors that lead outside are not hers to walk through. And for someone serving a sentence with no release date, that view does not function as relief or connection to nature. It functions as a daily, precise measurement of the distance between where she is and where she will never be again. The mountains do not move, the glass does not change, and neither does the sentence attached to her name. Women at the facility are housed in what the Utah Department of Corrections designates as the Dell Building, the General Population Unit for female inmates. It sits alongside programming areas that include educational services, culinary training, rehabilitation courses, and job preparation resources. Those resources exist. The hours spent inside them are real. The instruction is genuine. And for many of the women serving time in that facility, participation in those programs connects directly to a future outcome. A skill developed that translates to employment after release. A review that improves classification status. A step taken toward parole eligibility. For Kouri Richins, none of that connection exists. No completed program brings her closer to an exit. No educational certificate changes the endpoint. The door does not open, regardless of what she accomplishes on the other side of it. That is the first layer of what this sentence means when translated into the texture of daily life. The second layer may be the most difficult to fully absorb. Kouri Richins does not face this sentence surrounded by the people she stood at that courtroom podium speaking to for 30 minutes on May 13th, 2026. She faces it in silence. During her statement at sentencing, she told the court that she calls her sons every single day. She said she calls even when the calls do not connect, even when no one answers, even when the line goes through to nothing. She said she does it so her boys know she is thinking of them, so that the attempt is on the record, so that the reaching out never stops even when there is no one on the other side of it. That detail carries significant weight because it reveals something important about the distance between Kouri Richins and her children that existed long before the sentencing date arrived. Carter, Ashton, and Weston Richins have been living with their Aunt Katie Richins Benson and their Uncle Clint Benson since Kouri's arrest in May of 2023. Katie Benson is Eric's sister. She and her husband became the boys' legal guardians and have been managing the full reality of daily life for those three children through the arrest, through the trial, through the verdict, and through the sentencing. For more than 2 years before that May 2026 sentencing date, all contact between Kouri and her sons had been blocked. Not limited, blocked. She was calling into silence every single day for over 2 years inside that correctional facility. That situation does not improve with the sentencing. Visitation inside the Utah State Correctional Facility is governed by security classification and an approved visitor list. For someone convicted of first-degree aggravated murder and sentenced to life without parole, the access conditions are not lenient, and the people who would need to authorize and facilitate any contact between Kouri and her sons are the same people who blocked that contact throughout her time in Summit County Jail. The boys made their own position clear. Their impact statements did not include requests for visits. They did not describe hoping for a future version of a relationship. They did not leave any door open. Based on everything in the public record of those statements and the documented history of contact throughout the period of her incarceration, the possibility of any of those 3 boys walking into the Dell building to visit their mother sits as close to 0 as a probability can reach. That silence, the unanswered calls, the blocked contact, the statements those children wrote, is its own sentence running parallel to the legal one. One was handed down by a judge after a jury's verdict. The other was written by her children in their own words at their own pace, with their therapists carrying those words into the courtroom. Both point in exactly the same direction. Now consider who Kouri Richins is inside that facility beyond her legal classification, because she does not enter those doors as a person whose name no one has heard. In March of 2023, Kouri Richins self-published a children's book. The book, titled Are You With Me?, follows a young boy whose father watches over him from above. She appeared on local morning television programs to promote it. She spoke publicly about processing loss and about helping children move through grief. On May 8, 2023, approximately 2 months after the book was published and the media appearances had aired, she was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. That sequence, the book, the television interviews, the public portrait of a grieving mother sharing her family's pain, and then the arrest, became one of the most reported details of the entire case. It was covered by every major national outlet. It circulated across every platform. It is part of the documented public record of this case in a way that does not fade. And it does not remain outside when a person enters a correctional facility. It travels with them. People inside correctional settings follow the news. They recognize names. They know cases. The details of this one, the insurance policies taken out on Eric Richins without his knowledge, the financial fraud conducted over years, the children's book published in the months between his death and her arrest, and most significantly the impact statements written by her own sons, are all part of a public record that anyone with access to any form of news was able to follow in real time. Inside any correctional environment, a person's case history shapes how they are regarded by the people around them. Cases built on deliberate planning against a family member, on financial manipulation of a spouse, and particularly on the documented response of the children involved, carry a specific kind of social weight within the general population. That is not speculation. It is a pattern that corrections professionals have observed and documented across facilities and across years of research into prison social dynamics. The first weeks following a major sentencing are consistently described in the research literature on long-term incarceration as the most psychologically demanding period of an entire sentence. The shift from a county jail environment, which is temporary by nature, a holding space where legal proceedings are still active and something is always happening next, to a permanent facility, is a fundamental transition. It is the moment when the legal language of a verdict stops being words on paper and becomes the physical reality of every single morning. For 3 years, Kouri Richins sat in Summit County Jail while the legal process kept moving forward. There was always a next step, another hearing, another filing, another court date on the calendar. As long as that process was in motion, there was something ahead of her, something to prepare for, something that gave the passage of time a direction. That process has now stopped. The appeal her attorneys filed will work its way through the courts on its own timeline, separate from her daily existence, inside that facility. It does not change a single morning inside the Dell building. She serves her sentence from the first day forward. The appeal unfolds independently, with no effect on the schedule, the cell, the fluorescent light, or the unanswered phone calls. She told that courtroom she was coming home. The Utah State Correctional Facility is where she wakes up every morning. The mountains she once drove through freely are visible through windows she cannot open. Her sons are not on the approved contact list. There is no parole board that will ever call her name. That is not commentary. That is the documented public record of what a life without parole sentence means for Kouri Richins, established through court filings, facility records, and the statements of everyone present in that courtroom on May 13, 2026. At some point in covering a case like this, the focus has to shift. It has to move away from the sentence, the facility, the legal architecture, and the person who created all of it, and settle on the people who never had a single choice about any of it. 3 boys, that is where the real weight of this case lives. Carter, Ashton, and Weston Richins lost their father on March 4th, 2022. Eric Richins was 39 years old. He coached youth soccer. By every account from people who knew him, he was a fully present, genuinely committed father who showed up for his sons consistently and completely. Carter was 9 years old when that ended. Ashton was 7. Weston was 5. Then, on May 8th, 2023, their mother was arrested. In the span of roughly 14 months, those boys lost both parents. 2 separate dates, 2 permanent absences, both happening inside the same short window of their childhood. From the time of Kouri's arrest, Carter, Ashton, and Weston went to live with their Aunt Katie Richins Benson and Uncle Clint Benson, who became their legal guardians and have been raising them ever since. Through the trial, through the verdict, through the sentencing, through all of it. On March 16th, 2026, when that jury returned a guilty verdict on every count after roughly 3 hours of deliberation, those boys were somewhere outside that courtroom. In a real sense, they lost their mother a second time that afternoon. And on May 13th, 2026, sentencing day, they were not in the building, but they still found a way to speak. Their impact statements were written entirely in their own words. No attorneys reviewed them for legal strategy. No one shaped the language for courtroom effectiveness. They were written by children who were given a formal moment to say what they had been carrying, and who trusted their therapists to carry those words into the room where the sentence would be decided. Carter, now 13, said he does not miss his old life. He does not miss her. Ashton, now 11, said she took away everything from him and his brothers. He said he would not feel safe if she were ever released. And then there is Weston. Weston was 5 years old when his father died. He is 9 now. His entire school-age life, every year he has spent learning to read. Making friends, playing sports, growing up, has happened entirely inside the aftermath of that one morning in March of 2022, when he was given his formal opportunity to speak to the court, with the judge listening and the record open. He did not ask for a phone call. He did not ask for a visit. He did not reach toward her in any direction. He said that if she ever got out, he would be scared. He would be angry. He would not want to go near her. And then he said what he actually wanted. He wants her in jail forever. Judge Richard Marzicki, in his remarks before delivering the sentence, acknowledged that he could not predict how those boys would feel about this moment 30 years from now. He acknowledged openly that one of them may one day see this outcome differently. But he was clear that his decision was not built on their ages or on the intensity of their emotions in that courtroom. It was built on the evidence, on what was proven beyond a reasonable doubt, on the nature of what was done, on how it was done, and on why. He sentenced Kouri Richins to life without parole, because the facts of the case, in his legal judgment, called for exactly that. But no sentence restores what those boys lost on March 4th, 2022. No verdict returns the father who coached their soccer team and told them to be brave. No legal outcome repairs the particular kind of loss that comes from growing up without either parent in the home where your life began. Carter is 13. Ashton is 11. Weston is 9. Every year that passes, those boys grow further from who they were before that first morning when everything changed, and they build a life on the other side of it, with their aunt and uncle, with each other, in the only version of their childhood that remains available to them. Kouri Richins stood in that courtroom and told her boys she was coming home. She said it with full conviction, in front of a judge, in front of prosecutors, in front of Eric's family, in front of cameras that carried those words to every outlet that was covering the case. Her youngest son had already answered her in the only forum he was given. He was 5 when it all fell apart. He is 9 now. He has never known a complete version of his family. And when the moment came for him to put his truth on the record officially, With a judge listening and time standing still in that room, he did not reach toward her. He said he wants to feel safe. He said he wants it to be over. He said he wants her in jail forever. As of May 13th, 2026, that is exactly where she is. And for 3 boys growing up in their aunt and uncle's home, carrying the weight of 2 losses across 2 separate dates, building their lives in the space left behind by everything that was taken from them, the story underneath every headline is still unfolding, 1 year at a time, 1 morning at a time. In the only direction time moves. Now we need to address the question that sits at the center of this entire story. The question implied by the title of this documentary. Is life without parole inside a modern American prison more brutal than death row? That question is not rhetorical. It is not designed to provoke. It is a genuine inquiry into the psychological architecture of 2 different forms of permanent punishment. And the answer depends entirely on how you measure brutality. Death row inmates live under the weight of a specific endpoint. The sentence is execution. The timeline is uncertain, often stretching across decades of appeals. But the destination is defined. There is a final moment, a final day, a final procedure. Everything that happens on death row happens in relationship to that endpoint. The psychological experience is shaped by anticipation, by dread, by the knowledge that the state intends to end your biological existence, and the only question is when. That is a specific kind of psychological burden, and it is severe, but it is not the same as waking up every single morning knowing that nothing will ever change, that there is no end point except the natural failure of your body, that you will grow old inside the same walls, following the same schedule, seeing the same mountain range through glass you cannot open, surrounded by people you did not choose, in a life that has no forward momentum, except aging. Death row inmates wait for something. Life without parole inmates wait for nothing. They simply exist, day after day, year after year, decade after decade, with no possibility that the doors will open, no hope that the sentence will be commuted, no framework within which today's choices connect to a different tomorrow. Research into long-term incarceration consistently identifies hope as the single most important psychological resource that allows human beings to survive confinement. Hope does not have to be realistic. It does not have to be probable. It just has to exist. The possibility of parole, even if that possibility is 20 years away, even if the parole board has denied the same inmate 5 times in a row, still functions as a psychological anchor. It gives structure to time. It gives meaning to programs. It gives a reason to behave well, to take classes, to develop skills, to maintain relationships with family members who might be part of a life after release. Take that possibility away entirely, and what remains is existence without purpose, breathing without direction, aging without destination. For Kouri Richins, that reality is compounded by the complete separation from her children. Death row inmates can receive visits. They can maintain contact with family members. They can write letters. They can make phone calls. Those connections are monitored and controlled, but they exist. Kouri Richins calls her sons every single day and has been calling into silence for more than 2 years. The people who would need to approve visits have blocked all contact. The boys themselves have made clear, in their own words, in official court documents, that they do not want contact. That isolation is not imposed by the prison system. It is imposed by the people she gave birth to, the people whose father she took from them, the people who are now growing up in someone else's home because of decisions she made. That is a layer of psychological consequence that does not exist on death row in the same form. Death row inmates face execution. Life without parole inmates face decades of isolation from everyone they loved, with full awareness that the isolation is a direct result of their own actions, and no framework within which repair or reconciliation is possible. They do not get to apologize and be heard. They do not get to explain and be understood. They do not get to make amends in any form that reaches the people they harmed. They simply live with the weight of it alone for the rest of their lives. The Dell building, where Kouri Richins is housed, was designed with rehabilitation in mind. It has windows. It has programming. It has educational resources. But rehabilitation implies reintegration. It implies a return to society. For someone serving life without parole, those resources exist in a vacuum. There is no society to return to. There is no reintegration. There is only the facility, the schedule, the cell, and the decades ahead. Some people would argue that death is more brutal than any form of life, and that argument has moral and philosophical weight. But from a purely psychological standpoint, the research suggests something more complicated. Death row inmates live in a state of acute anticipatory dread. Life without parole inmates live in a state of chronic purposelessness. One is sharp and immediate. The other is dull and endless. One has a defined shape. The other has no shape at all. And for many people who study long-term incarceration and its effects on the human mind, the endless, formless quality of life without parole represents a more profound psychological burden than the anticipation of execution. Kouri Richins will wake up tomorrow morning at 5, when the alarm sounds across the Dell building. She will follow the same schedule she followed today. She will eat the same meals in the same chow hall. She will spend the same 18 hours in or near her cell. She will call her sons and receive no answer. She will look out the windows at mountains she will never walk through again. And she will do the same thing the day after that, and the day after that, for decades, until her body fails, and she dies inside the same facility where she is currently housed. That is what life without parole means in practice. And whether that is more or less brutal than death row depends entirely on how you define brutality. But here is what is not up for debate. 3 boys lost their father on March 4th, 2022. They lost their mother on May 8th, 2023. They are being raised by their aunt and uncle. They wrote impact statements in their own words saying they do not feel safe, they do not want contact, and they want the person who caused all of this to stay in prison forever. A judge listened to those statements, reviewed the evidence, and sentenced Kouri Richins to life without parole. She is currently serving that sentence in the Utah State Correctional Facility. She has no release date. She has no contact with her children. She has no answer to the question, what am I working toward? And every single one of those facts is part of the documented public record. This is true CrimeVic, and we go deeper than headlines. If this story gave you a different perspective on what a life sentence actually means, if it made you think about the consequences that extend beyond courtrooms and into the decades that follow, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We cover cases that other channels stop following after the verdict, and we do it with the depth and detail this kind of storytelling requires. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.